Oh, hello there, dear. Come in, come in. Don't mind the weather. I've always found the sound of rain rather comforting, you know. It's like the world is taking a long, slow breath. It makes the tea taste warmer. I think. I was just sitting here, watching the drops chase each other down the glass, and my fingers, while they found their way to this old thing. It's funny how objects can hold more than just their own weight, isn't it? This little locket, it's not worth much, in silver, I suppose. But in memories, oh my dear, it's heavier than a mountain. A promise. We make them so easily when we're young. We throw them around like pennies. I promise I'll be there. I promise I won't tell. But a real promise, a deep one. It has roots. It can be a comfort, a sturdy oak you can lean against in a storm. Or, if you're not careful, it can be a chain, tethering you to a ghost. For the longest time, I wasn't sure which one this was for me. It all started back in, it must have been 1958, a lifetime ago, it feels. Our house, back then, wasn't grand. Not like the houses you see on the television. But it was everything. It was a sturdy little two-story thing with a squeaky third step on the stairs, and a rose bush by the porch that my mother babied more than she did me. I think in the mornings, the whole house smelled of her baking yeast and cinnamon and love. And in the afternoons, you'd hear the gentle thump-thump from the shed, out back. That was my father. He was a carpenter, but not the kind that just built cupboards and chairs. He was an artist. He could make a piece of wood sing. He was a quiet man. My father, strong, with hands that were calloused from work but gentle enough to fix my doll's broken leg. He was my rock. He gave me this locket for my 16th birthday. It was so plain compared to the fancy jewelry other girls were getting. Just a simple, unadorned, silver oval. I must have looked a little disappointed, though I tried to hide it. He saw it, of course. He saw everything. He took my hand and said, "Ilara, my love, this locket is empty for a reason. It's not for me to fill, it's for you. One day, you'll know exactly what picture belongs in here. A picture of what matters most. Your own home, your own heart." And he smiled, that slow, warm smile of his. Life was simple then. School, chores, stolen conversations with a boy from down the lane named Arthur, who had kind eyes and a laugh that made my stomach doof. The world felt safe, predictable. But life has a way of pulling the rug out from under you when you're least expecting it. It started with a cough. A persistent, nagging cough that my father couldn't shake. Then came the tiredness, a weariness that even his strong shoulders couldn't carry. The doctor's visits became more frequent. The hushed whispers between my parents in the dead of night grew louder in the silence. My Uncle Thomas, my father's younger brother, started visiting more often. He was a different sort of man. Sharp suits, a slick smile, always talking about investments and opportunities in the city. He'd clap my father on the back and say, "Don't you worry about a thing, Charles. I'll handle the paperwork. You just rest." My mother, bless her heart, she saw it as kindness, a brother looking out for his family. I felt a little prickle of something I couldn't name. It was a feeling I pushed down, ashamed of myself for thinking ill of family in such a time. The day came when the doctor sat us all down in the living room. The air was thick and heavy, like before a thunderstorm. I don't remember the words he used, medical words, long and complicated. All I remember is the look on my mother's face. The light just went out. My father, though, he was calm. He looked at me, his eyes clear and steady, even as his body was failing him. That evening, he called me to his bedside. The room smelled of camphor and sickness, a smell I will never forget. He took my hand, the same one he'd held when he gave me the locket. His grip was so weak. "Elara," he whispered, his voice a dry rustle of leaves. Promise me, you'll look after your mother, and this house is our story. It's your mother's safety. Don't let anything happen to it. Promise me." What could I do? I was 16. He was my world. "I promise, Papa," I choked out, tears streaming down my face. "I promise." He squeezed my hand, a flicker of that old strength, and a look of peace settled on his face. He trusted me. He believed in me. I held on to that promise like a lifeline. I didn't know then that it would feel like a millstone around my neck. He passed away 2 days later, just as the sun was rising, and with his last breath, the world as I knew it, the world that smelled of cinnamon and sawdust, it simply ended. The silence he left behind was the loudest sound I had ever heard. The days that followed his passing are a blur. A gray, hollowed-out fog of grief. People came and went. Neighbors brought casseroles that sat untouched. Relatives offered condolences that sounded like empty echoes in the vast emptiness of our house. The house itself seemed to be mourning. The floors didn't creak with life anymore. They groaned with sorrow. My mother, oh, my poor mother. She floated through the rooms like a ghost, her hands constantly smoothing the arm of my father's empty chair. She was there, but she was gone, and that left me, a 16-year-old girl, suddenly the keeper of a heartbreaking promise. I tried. I truly did. I made sure my mother ate, even if it was just a few bites of toast. I kept the house clean, scrubbing floors as if I could scrub away the sadness. But I was just a child playing at being a grown-up, and the costume was far too big for me. Uncle Thomas became a permanent fixture. He was ever so helpful. You know, Eleanor, don't you worry your pretty head, he'd say to my mother, patting her hand. I'll sort through Charles's affairs. It's the least I can do for my brother. He would spend hours in my father's workshop, which he now called the office, sorting through stacks of papers. There was a constant rustling sound coming from that room, the sound of our life being shuffled and rearranged by someone else's hands. I felt that unease again, a cold knot in my stomach. I'd ask him what he was doing, and he'd just smile, that slick, reassuring smile. Just accounts, Alara, debts to be settled, assets to be managed. Your father was a wonderful man, but not the most organized. He made it sound like he was doing us a great favor, cleaning up a mess my sainted father had left behind. And my mother, lost in her sea of grief, she believed him. She was grateful. How could I argue? How could I tell my grieving mother that her brother-in-law, the man who was supposed to be our support, made my skin crawl? I felt guilty for my suspicions, chiding myself for being ungrateful. Amidst all this gray, there was one small sliver of color. Arthur, the boy from down the lane. He was older now, a young man of 19, working with his father as a builder. He didn't offer empty words. He offered action. One day, he showed up on our porch with a toolbox. The front step is loose. Mrs. Miller, he said to my mother. My dad noticed. I'll just fix it up. No trouble. He didn't wait for an answer. He just knelt and got to work. The sound of his hammer was solid, real. It was a sound of fixing, not of breaking. He started coming by more often, sometimes with a bag of fresh vegetables from his mother's garden, sometimes just to sit on the porch swing with me in the evenings, not saying much at all. We'd watch the fireflies start to dot the twilight, and in those quiet moments, I could almost breathe again. He never pushed, never pried. He just was a quiet, steady presence in a world that had tilted off its axis. He'd look at me with those kind eyes, and I felt seen, not as a grieving daughter or the new lady of the house, but just as Ilara, a flicker of a forgotten girl. A slow, tentative warmth began to bloom in my chest, a flower pushing its way through cracked concrete. It was a fragile hope, but it was hope nonetheless. One afternoon, Uncle Thomas came into the kitchen where my mother and I were having tea. He was carrying a sheaf of important-looking documents, tied with a ribbon. He laid them on the table with a soft thud. "All right, Eleanor," he said, his voice full of gentle solemnity. "This is it. A few last things to sign. It's just to settle the estate, to put everything officially in your name, and make things easier for you both going forward. It'll transfer the holdings, clear up the final accounts." He pointed to a few lines at the bottom of the pages. "Just sign here and here." My mother, her eyes glassy and unfocused, looked at the papers as if they were written in a foreign language. Is this what Charles would have wanted?" she whispered. Uncle Thomas placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's exactly what he would have wanted," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "To know you're secure, trusting him completely, lost in her grief, and relying on his supposed expertise." My mother picked up the pen he offered. Her hand trembled as she signed her name on each dotted line. I watched the ink dry, a dark stain on the crisp paper, and that cold knot in my stomach tightened into a fist of ice. For a few months after the papers were signed, a strange sort of peace settled over the house. A false peace, like the quiet in the air after a storm has passed, but before you've seen the damage. Uncle Thomas visited less frequently. He'd call on the telephone sometimes, asking if we were all right, his voice still full of that practiced concern. My mother seemed to be slowly, so slowly, emerging from her fog. She started humming in the kitchen again, a tune that was slightly off-key but beautiful to my ears. Arthur and I grew closer. Our quiet evenings on the porch swing turned into walks down the country lanes. My hand shyly tucked into the crook of his arm, he told me about his dream of one day building houses of his own, not just repairing them. I felt a sense of a future, a tiny pinprick of light at the end of a long, dark tunnel. I was beginning to believe we would be okay. That's the cruelty of life, I suppose. It lets you believe you're safe, just before the floor gives way. The knock on the door came on a Tuesday morning. It was a crisp autumn day, the kind where the air smells of wood smoke and fallen leaves. I opened the door to a man I'd never seen before. He was wearing a stiff suit and a hat, and he held a leather briefcase. He didn't smile. "Miss Alara Miller?" he asked, his voice flat and impersonal. "I'm here from the firm of Thompson and Finch. I have a notice for the occupants of this property." He handed me a thick, cream-colored envelope. My hands trembled as I took it. It felt cold, official. I opened it right there on the doorstep, the man watching me with detached curiosity. The words swam before my eyes. Legal terms, phrases I didn't understand. But some words were horrifyingly clear. Notice to vacate. Sale of property. New ownership. 30 days. The world tilted. The smell of wood smoke vanished, replaced by the metallic taste of fear in my mouth. There must be a mistake, I stammered. "This is our house. My father built this house." The man sighed. A small, impatient sound. "The deed was transferred, and the property was sold to my client 3 months ago. Signed over by Mrs. Eleanor Miller to her brother-in-law, Mr. Thomas Miller, who subsequently sold it to settle. And I quote, outstanding personal debts. It's all perfectly legal. You have 30 days to vacate the premises." The papers my mother had signed. They weren't to settle the estate. They were to sign it away. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't kindness. It wasn't help. It was a calculated, cold-blooded theft. He had used our grief, our trust, our vulnerability, to steal my father's legacy right out from under us. I confronted him, of course. I took the bus into the city that very afternoon, the notice clutched in my sweating palm. I found his office, a fancy place with a polished wooden door. When I finally got in to see him, he wasn't smiling anymore. His face was a hard, closed mask. "Ilara, you're being hysterical," he said, leaning back in his leather chair. "Your father left behind enormous debts you knew nothing about. I did what I had to do to protect your mother from creditors. Selling the house was the only way. I've saved you from ruin." It was a lie, a venomous, self-serving lie. My father was meticulous, careful. He would never have been so reckless. I called him a thief, a liar, a ghoul who fed on the sorrow of his own family. He just looked at me with cold, dead eyes and told his secretary to show me out. I returned home in a daze. My mother was sitting in the living room, a half-darned sock in her lap. I had to tell her. As the words left my mouth, I watched the fragile light that had begun to return to her eyes extinguish completely. I watched her break all over again. We were adrift, lost. It's a feeling that seems to stretch across time and space. By the way, dear, where are you watching from? What time is it there? I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. It's just nice to know we're all here together, isn't it? It's a comfort. That night, sitting in my father's house, a house that was no longer ours, we had nothing but each other and the crushing weight of a countdown. 30 days. It felt like a death sentence. 30 days, for weeks. It sounds like a stretch of time, but when it's a deadline to dismantle your entire world, it passes in a blink. Each day was a new kind of torture. The act of packing was a funeral for our life. Every object I touched held a memory. My father's favorite teacup with the small chip on the rim. The worn copy of Pride and Prejudice my mother read every year. The height chart we'd marked on the inside of the pantry door, a ladder of pencil marks climbing toward a future that had just been erased. How do you pack a sunbeam that used to fall on the rug just so? How do you fold a memory of laughter into a cardboard box? We had to sell most of our furniture for pennies on the dollar. The big, solid dining table where we'd shared 1,000 meals. My father's armchair. My mother stood by, silent and frail, as strangers tramped through our home, haggling over the pieces of our past. I saw her touch the back of the armchair one last time before 2 men carried it out the door. And a part of me broke with her. Arthur was my rock through it all. He didn't offer platitudes. He showed up with boxes and tape. He lifted the heavy things, his face set with a quiet anger on our behalf. He never once said "I told you so" about my uncle, though he must have suspected him all along. He just worked, his presence a silent testament of support. "We'll get through this, Elara," he'd say, his voice firm. "I promise you, we will." He used that word, promise, and for the first time since my father's death, it didn't sound like a chain, it sounded like an anchor. The day we left was gray and drizzling, the sky weeping with us. I took one last look at the house, at my mother's rosebush drooping in the rain. I closed the door behind me, the click of the latch echoing like a gunshot. In the quiet street, we left with 2 suitcases each, containing the barest remnants of our lives. Our new home was a single, cramped room on the 2nd floor above a bakery in a poorer part of town. The stairs were steep and narrow, and the entire place had the permanent, cloying smell of rising yeast. It was a constant, sickly sweet mockery of the wholesome smell of my mother's kitchen. The room was damp, with a single window that looked out onto a grimy brick wall. There was a lumpy bed for my mother, and a thin mattress on the floor for me. At night, we could hear the rats scurrying in the walls. This was our new reality. My promise to my father echoed in my head, a constant, jeering taunt: "Look after your mother, look after this house." I had failed on both counts. Shame was a heavy blanket I couldn't throw off. To make ends meet, I took any work I could find. I scrubbed the floors of the local pub, my hands raw from the harsh soap. I mended clothes for a tailor, my eyes straining in the dim light. The girls I went to school with, if they saw me on the street, would look away, pretending they didn't recognize the girl with the chapped hands and the worn-out coat. I looked in the small, cracked mirror in our room and saw a stranger, her eyes old and tired. The fire, the hope, the girl who walked with Arthur under the stars, she was gone. All that was left was this hollowed-out shell, fueled by shame and desperation. My mother, in that damp, dreary room, she began to wither. The cold seeped into her bones, and she developed a terrible cough, a wet, rattling sound that kept me awake at night. She had no energy, no will. She was fading before my very eyes. Arthur would visit, bringing a small flask of hot soup his mother had made, or a thicker blanket he'd bought with his own wages. He would try to make her smile, but the light was gone. One evening, her cough grew worse. She was feverish, her breathing shallow. I ran for the local doctor, a stern, overworked man who smelled of antiseptic. He examined her briefly, his face grim. "It's her lungs," he said bluntly. "This damp air is poison for her. She needs warmth, proper nutrition, and this medicine." He scribbled a prescription on a piece of paper. "Without it," he said, looking me straight in the eye, "she won't last the winter." I took the prescription, my hand shaking. I knew, without even asking, that we couldn't afford it. I had failed, completely. I sat there on my mattress on the floor, the sound of my mother's ragged breathing filling the small, dark room, and I felt a despair so profound, so absolute, I thought it would swallow me whole. For a full day, I was paralyzed by that despair. I just sat there, listening to my mother's struggle for each breath, the doctor's words echoing in my mind. "She won't last the winter." Winter was coming. I could feel it in the chill that crept through the window frame, in the deepening gray of the sky. Helplessness is a cold, heavy poison. It stills your hands and silences your mind. I had nothing. We had nothing. My promise to my father was a dead thing, a monument to my failure. In the bottom of my suitcase, tucked away in a cloth bag, was a small, unassuming bundle. It was the one thing I had insisted on bringing from his workshop. His carving tools, a few small knives, some gouges, their wooden handles worn smooth and dark from the oils of his hands. I had packed them not with any intention of using them, but just to have a piece of him, a tangible connection to the man who smelled of sawdust and love. On the second night, with the feeble light of our one lamp pushing back the shadows, I pulled them out. My hands were stiff and sore from scrubbing floors, but as I held his favorite carving knife, something shifted inside me. My father used to carve things as a hobby, you see. In the evenings, after a long day of building sturdy things like doors and cabinets, he would sit on the porch and carve delicate things. His specialty was birds. Tiny, intricate birds, each feather etched with impossible detail. He'd taught me a little when I was a girl, showing me how to follow the grain of the wood, how to let the shape reveal itself. "You don't force it, Elara," he'd say. "You listen to the wood. Desperation is a powerful motivator." It can either crush you or force you to find a strength you never knew you had. I had a small block of pine Arthur had brought for me to wedge under our wobbly table. I took it, and I took my father's knife. My first attempts were clumsy, awful. The wood split, my cuts were jagged, my hands, accustomed to rough work, had forgotten the language of delicacy. I almost gave up, tears of frustration blurring my vision. But then I closed my eyes and tried to remember his hands. The calm, steady movement. I tried to listen to the wood. Slowly, painstakingly, a shape began to emerge. A small, plump robin with its head cocked to one side. It wasn't perfect. It was nothing like the masterpieces my father had created, but it was something. It was a robin. It was a tiny piece of defiance against the crushing weight of my life. I had made something, not just scrubbed something, or mended something someone else had made. I had created. Arthur came by the next evening with a loaf of bread, still warm from the bakery downstairs. He saw the little robin sitting on the windowsill. He picked it up gently, turning it over in his large, capable hands. He didn't say it was wonderful or brilliant. He just said, "You made this." There was a look of quiet awe in his eyes. "You have his gift, Eli." Then he said the words that would change everything. "You should sell these at the Saturday market." Fear washed over me. "I can't," I said immediately. "They're not good enough. People will laugh." The thought of sitting there, offering my pathetic, little creations, being rejected. The shame was too much to bear. "What's the alternative?" Arthur asked, his voice gentle but firm. "What's the risk?" "A little embarrassment, weighed against your mother's medicine." He was right. My pride was a luxury I could not afford. That Saturday, Arthur built me a tiny stall from a few spare crates. I had managed to carve 2 more birds, a wren and a sparrow. They sat there on a piece of burlap, my 3 little wooden soldiers. The market was a whirlwind of noise and people. Farmers hawking vegetables, women selling jams and pies. I felt small, invisible, my heart pounding with every person who walked past without a glance. Hours passed. The sun began to dip lower in the sky. I was ready to pack up, to accept this final defeat. Then, an elderly woman with kind, crinkled eyes stopped. She picked up the little wren, her touch reverent. "Oh my," she whispered. "This reminds me of the wrens in my garden." She looked at me. "How much for this little one, dear?" I was so shocked I could barely speak. I mumbled the price, a few shillings, what felt like a king's ransom. She smiled and counted the coins into my palm. The metal was cool against my skin, but a fire ignited in my chest. It wasn't just money. It was validation. It was proof that my hands could still create value, could still build something from nothing. I ran all the way to the chemist's shop, clutching those coins. That night, I gave my mother her first dose of the proper medicine. Watching her drink it down, I felt a flicker of hope so fierce it almost hurt. That little wooden bird didn't just buy medicine. It bought me a future. That first sale was like striking a match in a dark cave. It wasn't a roaring fire, but it was light. It was enough to see the next step. Every spare moment I had, I carved. My hands, once raw from cleaning chemicals, became calloused in new ways, from the familiar grip of my father's tools. My mind, once consumed by a loop of shame and failure, was now filled with the shapes of blue jays and finches, with the challenge of capturing the curve of a wing or the tilt of a head. The tiny room above the bakery, which had once smelled only of yeast and despair, now carried the clean, sharp scent of pine and cedar. Every Saturday, Arthur would help me set up my little stall at the market. At first, I would sell 1 bird, maybe 2, but people started to notice. "The bird girl," they called me. My skill grew with every piece I finished. The birds became more lifelike, more detailed. I learned to use different types of wood, to bring out the grain to mimic the pattern of feathers. I started getting special requests. A woman wanted a pair of doves for a wedding cake topper. A man asked for a hawk, powerful and proud, for his mantelpiece. Each sale was a small victory, a brick in the foundation of a new life. With the money, we were able to provide for my mother proper food, her medicine, a new, warmer coat. The rattling cough began to subside, and something else happened. Seeing me work, seeing me find a purpose, it gave her a purpose. The light started to return to her eyes, slowly but surely. She would sit in her chair and help me, sanding the rough edges of a piece with a small square of paper, her movements slow but deliberate. We were a team again. After a year of living above the bakery, we had saved enough to move. We found a small, clean two-room flat on a quiet street. It had 2 windows that let in the afternoon sun, and a small kitchen where my mother began to bake again. Just simple things, like scones, but the smell filled our little home with a joy I thought I'd never know again. It wasn't the house my father had built, but it was a home we had earned. It was ours. One evening, Arthur and I were walking by the canal, the setting sun painting the water in shades of orange and pink. He stopped and took both my hands in his. He didn't have a fancy ring. He didn't have grand promises of a mansion. He looked at me, his kind eyes serious and full of a love that had weathered the worst of storms. "Elara," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I don't have much to offer, but I know how to build things, and I want to build a life with you. Marry me." My yes was immediate, whispered into the twilight. We were married a month later, in a simple ceremony at the registry office, with my mother and his parents as our witnesses. Our marriage wasn't founded on fairy tale dreams, but on the solid ground of mutual respect, shared struggle, and a quiet, unshakable love. One day, a neighbor mentioned she'd heard some news. Uncle Thomas, the man from the city he'd been in business with, had been a charlatan. The investments had all been a scam. He had lost everything, the money he'd gotten from selling our house, and more. He was ruined, forced to sell his own fancy home and move into a boarding house. When I heard the news, I expected to feel a surge of triumphant joy, of righteous vindication, but what I felt was a strange emptiness, a quiet, profound sadness, not for him, precisely, but for the man he could have been, for the family he had shuttered out of greed. I realized then that holding on to my anger was like carrying a hot coal, hoping he would get burned. But I was the only one with scorched hands. In the quiet of my heart, I let it go. I didn't forgive him for his sake. I did it for mine. Years past our life was not easy, but it was good. Arthur's building business grew, and my little bird carving venture flourished. We saved every penny we could. Then the day came. Arthur came home, his face glowing, holding a set of keys. He had found a small, neglected cottage on the edge of town. It needed a lot of work, but it had a garden and a sturdy roof. We had saved enough for the down payment. Standing on the doorstep of that little cottage, our very own home, the keys, cold and solid in my hand, I clutched the old silver locket in my pocket. And standing there, on the verge of this new beginning we had built from sawdust and struggle, I finally understood what my father had really meant all those years ago. That little cottage was more work than we could ever have imagined. The floors sloped, the paint was peeling, and the garden was a jungle of weeds, but to us, it was a palace. It was a testament to our survival. Arthur, with his builder's hands, saw not the flaws but the potential, and I, with my carver's eyes, saw not a wreck but a block of wood waiting for its true shape to be revealed. We poured all our love, our sweat, and our hopes into that place. Arthur knocked down a wall to create a bright, airy living space, built me a proper workshop in the back, with a large window that overlooked the garden, so I could watch the real birds as I carved their wooden counterparts. My mother, her health fully restored in the dry, warm air of our new home, took charge of the garden. She waged a gentle war on the weeds, and soon, where there had been thorns and thistles, there were rows of vegetables and bright, cheerful flowers. My father's rosebush was gone, but my mother planted a new one by the door, a vibrant yellow rose that seemed to smile at the sun. Our children were born in that house. First a son, then a daughter, your mother, my dear. Their laughter filled the rooms, chasing out the last of the old ghosts. They grew up with the smell of Arthur's sawdust and my mother's baking, in a house built not just of wood and nails, but of resilience and love. My little bird carving business, Elara's Wrens, became well known. People would come from towns away to buy one of my creations. It provided a steady income that helped us turn our little cottage into a comfortable, loving home. One afternoon, years after we had moved in, I was sitting in my workshop, polishing a newly finished kingfisher. The sun was streaming through the window, glinting off the polished wood. I was thinking about my father, as I often did in that quiet space. I reached into my sewing box and pulled out the old, plain silver locket he had given me. I hadn't opened it in years. I had been so focused on fulfilling the promise tied to the house, I had forgotten about the locket's purpose. I clicked it open. It was still empty, its silver insides gleaming. One day, you'll know exactly what picture belongs in here. A picture of what matters most. His words came back to me, as clear as if he were standing beside me. And in that moment, I finally understood. The promise wasn't about the bricks and mortar of that first house. My father wasn't a sentimental man in that way. He was a practical man, a builder. He knew houses could be lost. The promise was about protecting the feeling of home, the safety, the love, the security. The promise was to look after my mother, to make sure she was safe and cared for. The promise was to build a place where family could thrive. My old house was just a vessel. The treasure inside was the love, the family, the life we had. And when that vessel was shattered, the treasure wasn't lost. It was just waiting for a new vessel to be built. My uncle had stolen the container, but he could never touch the contents. I went inside and found the photo album. I didn't look for a picture of the old house. I found a small, slightly faded photograph taken the previous summer. It was of me and Arthur, standing in front of our yellow rosebush, our arms around our two smiling children, our family, our home. I carefully trimmed it into a tiny oval and slipped it into one side of the locket. On the other side, I left it empty. A space for the future, for grandchildren like you. I clicked it shut. It finally felt complete. I hadn't failed my father. I had kept his promise in the truest way possible. I had built a home from the ashes of my old one. The camera slowly zooms back in on Nan in her chair. The rain has stopped, and a sliver of late afternoon sun cuts through the clouds, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. She holds the locket up, its silver surface catching the light. A gentle, peaceful smile is on her face. So, you see, my dear, strength isn't about never falling down. It's not about being unbreakable. Real strength is in the getting up. It's in the quiet, stubborn refusal to be defined by your trauma. It's in picking up the broken pieces and realizing you have the power to build something new, something that is uniquely yours. Home isn't a place you can lose. It's a thing you carry inside you, and a thing you can choose to build, wherever you are, with whatever you have. Even if all you have is a borrowed block of wood and a memory of love. Next time you feel like you've lost something you can't replace, just remember these old hands. Remember the little wooden bird. You have everything you need, right here inside you, to carve your own future. Now, this tea has gone a bit cold. Let me just pop the kettle on again. It's always a good time for a fresh cup.